It's Stacey Cole and Carol Hughes. Carol's filling in for Tony this week, and we are going back in time. It's like we're getting into the DeLorean and going back to last summer, I believe, last spring. And we're going to talk about Lucy Letby, the British neonatal nurse who was previously found guilty of murdering 7 infants and attempting to murder 6 others. She is back in court again. Now facing charges of attempted murder involving a baby girl known as Child K. Why don't we dive in, Carol, and just get some thoughts from you? I know you haven't followed it extensively, but we talked a little bit before we got into this. This is a huge case.
So many kids. Like, it's so heartbreaking. And the fact that she's connected to each one of these children who died in a very not just passerby sort of way. You know, she's a nurse with this little bitty patient. Mm-hmm. And one after another, after another, after another, after another, these kids keep passing away. And, you know, you've heard similar stories like in hospitals where patients were fine. And there's a number of nurses who have done similar things with other patients. And she was found guilty. And I think I have no problem with that verdict on all those kids. She was found guilty. But you and I were just talking, if it sounds like there was some that maybe the jury was hung on. I'm not totally sure how the court system works in England. If I was the parent of that child, I would want justice for my kid. Mm-hmm. And I would fight until I got it. It's justice for your child and for you and your family.
Well, and it's interesting. I just, something popped into my head. I guess I could call myself a retired veterinary nurse, but I used to not help in surgery, but monitor patients, animals. And then as soon as they're out of the anesthesia and they're in their recovery unit, you go in and check on them like every 5 to 10 minutes and make sure they're breathing okay, make sure they're doing all right, that their color's okay and things like that. That their heart sounds good, their lungs sound good. And I remember there was one pet, I think it was a cat, went in, the cat did great through surgery, was doing really well at all of our checks. And I went back in, and as I'm listening with my stethoscope, I'm like, we've got a problem in the lungs. I'm hearing fluid. I'm hearing something. So I didn't just hover over the pet and try to, do anything. I ran and got the doctor. That's what you do. You've got a child that's crashing. You have a pet that's crashing. And the pet wasn't crashing at that point, but something was abnormal. I hauled ass and got the doctor. And we ended up transferring the pet to our emergency clinic and ended up recovering. But that's what a nurse does. They're monitoring and they alert the doctor when there is a problem. And the doctor intervenes and makes the final decision on what we need to do. And in every case, Lucy took this all on herself. A child would crash in front of her for whatever reason, which they deemed was her. And she never called the doctor in to deal with the situation. It was just, oh, baby died. Sorry.
Which is, I don't know why some people want to do things like that. Because you go into a profession like nursing, and there's just been so many instances of it. There was that male nurse, I can't think of his name, went all around the country, and deaths followed him wherever he went. So in some way, it's some kind of weird God complex thing that you could take life away.
Carol, there's another judge, and I'm looking it up right now. Here in the United States, I want to say she was out east. Her name was Nurse Presti, I believe. I'm looking her up right now. We followed her a little bit. Just a horrific case where she was a nurse in care facilities, nursing facilities, like for elderly people and people recovering, and nursing home facilities. And she was injecting insulin to patients who didn't even need it. So she was crashing them,
so
basically.
They're doing it on purpose. And so I think in this case with these children, and she was found guilty of a lot of deaths, like, what was it, 7? 6, 7. She was found guilty of 7 murders and it attempted to murder 6 others.
Yeah. And Nurse Presti here in the United States, Heather Presti, this is in Pennsylvania, 41 years old. She killed 19 patients, ages 43 to 104. She often felt that, especially some of the older patients, needed to die, is basically what she said. So she would inject insulin into them to basically kill them because they needed to die. She was playing God.
And like these are little children.
Yeah.
Like in the NICU, like little bitty children. And this one, child K, was, I think, born under 2 pounds. So,
Yeah, these
the
were
families
premature.
already have a fight on their hands. And then they end up with Lucy Letby as the poor child's nurse. And then the baby never has a chance.
Mm-hmm. And there's some cases, some of the children, I think, were injected with air in their IV line and insulin. And the problem with insulin, and I don't want to give anybody ideas, but insulin, the body uses it and it metabolizes in a way that it's really hard to track how much was given. So if a child needed insulin and then crashed because you gave too much, it's hard to tell how much you gave. There's not, unless you catch it right away, I don't think you can quantify. She gave 6 mils of insulin to the child. I don't think you can come up with that number. So the question remains, did the child just not do well, or did you overdose them?
Well, and it sounds like she did some other things to some of these kids with tubes that were placed in them. And, But
It's
so this case,
story.
I think maybe when the initial trial, like this was one of the cases that the jury didn't come to a verdict on. So that's why they're able to retry this case. Is that kind of how you understand it?
Yeah. And we looked that up just before we started recording here because we couldn't understand. She already went through a jury trial. And why are we doing this again? Well, that jury could not come up with a verdict for child K. So they've assembled yet another jury. And now they're going to go through child K's evidence. They're not going to retry the others. It's just solely on the evidence presented in court about child K, is my understanding.
And this is an attempted murder charge because then the poor little baby was transferred to another hospital. That's where she passed away. So,
yes, so she did die, but she didn't die directly in the hands of Lucy. But I beg the question, did Lucy's behavior toward her and what she did that lend itself to her eventual death? What a complicated case.
It really
and the fact
is.
that it's British law as well, which makes it even more complicated. But she's back in the news again. She's being tried again. And I'm sure for these poor families, let's talk about trauma that they're, the other families that their case already came up and she was convicted on it. Well, now they have to deal with her back in the news again. Why didn't we just get this done the first time?
Mm-hmm.
These poor families are being re-victimized yet again. And I get it. They need to go through this, but the court system needs to do what they need to do. But it just, I can't see that happening here in the United States where, we've got somebody serving time in jail and we're just going to bring this case a year later. The next, you've murdered X amount of people, we'll just grab another case. And here's an interesting thing. And I'm sure we've got some listeners who might be screaming at their device going, you don't understand law. And no, I'm not a lawyer.
I'm not either. That's why I'm asking these questions.
Well, exactly.
I'm not totally sure.
I found out something about the law last night. My husband's an attorney and he doesn't comment on cases that we follow because he just really keeps to himself on law and he doesn't practice criminal law. So, but we got to talking about the Karen Reed case and he brought something up to me that just floored me. I had no idea a judge could do this, that if a jury came back with a guilty verdict and the judge didn't feel that the evidence lent itself to a guilty verdict, the judge can intervene and pull that verdict back.
Mm-hmm. I heard of a case recently where the judge overruled the jury.
I didn't know that was a thing. And see, I wonder in a case like this, if the jury couldn't convict on this one charge, could the judge have stepped in? And I don't know enough about our legal system to say anything like that. And I certainly don't know enough about the system in the UK. But I just wonder, was there enough evidence about child K for them to have made a decision? And I'm wondering why they couldn't.
Well, they're just looking at this one case, and they're not allowing any of the prior convictions to be brought in, I don't think. So I don't know, because it says your task is to determine on all the evidence placed before you and on nothing else. So they can't bring their preconceived ideas in about her, which would be hard to find jurors.
Yeah, and this was
Especially
a worldwide
there,
case. This is akin to O.J. Simpson type thing. Everybody knew about this case. So as a human being, I think you're very hard pressed. It was a discussion that I was having with my husband. Like, I can't be an impartial juror. I don't know how to be impartial in situations where it's children being abused or animals or things like that. I'm not going to be impartial. And I have no problem saying that. When I was summoned to jury duty last year, I pretty much laid it out that, sorry, I have opinions. I can't set it aside and look at the law. God bless those of you who can do it. I can't. And I don't know how anybody could sit on this jury and claim that they don't have an opinion on this case,
Yeah,
How?
It would be really hard to find an impartial jury.
Yeah. So it's going to be interesting to watch how this goes down. I mean, she was accused of force feeding milk to infants, poisoning them with insulin, and injecting air into their tiny bodies through IVs. I don't know. Tony and I, when we covered this case, because we have an entire channel on Lucy Letby, if you want to go back and review some of it, it's fascinating. But I said to him, what if she's just the most unlucky nurse in the UK and all these really fragile infants were going to die anyway and happened to do it on her shift? Is that possible?
Yeah. Well, in this baby K case, she was actually discovered by a doctor standing over the bed of this baby when the baby's in distress. So the doctor must have walked up. So
yeah, the doctor came in, and what was happening was the baby was desaturating. It was losing oxygenation in its blood. It wasn't breathing properly. So it was starting to crash.
And she's doing nothing. And she's a nurse.
Doing nothing. She's seeing this happen. She's watching this happen. The alarms had been disabled because when your blood oxygen level goes below, probably, I think it's 94%, when it starts to drop, an alarm goes off. Well, those alarms were disabled. She's standing there watching this baby probably turn cyanotic, meaning turning blue, and watching it not doing anything. And the doctor walks in and sees this. So to me, is that unlucky? No, that's incompetent or evil.
It does say in this story I just read that it does say jurors were unable to reach a verdict on this case and were eventually so the charges were discharged, but they retry in this case.
Well, now I'm thoroughly confused. I don't understand why they'd bring it back.
Justice.
Bingo.
Give that little baby justice. I think that's what that's all about.
I think you're right.
You're locked into the Hidden Killers podcast.
Want more? Start binging on all of our true crime podcasts right now through Apple Podcasts and get an ad-free experience when you sign up to be a True Crime Today Premium Plus member exclusively on Apple Podcasts.
More of the Hidden Killers podcast dropping soon.
Press subscribe now.